Welcome, listener. Today we're tackling one of the topics we get asked about the most, a
Yeah.
real deep dive into emotional experience.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't about, vague self-help. We are going forensic on this.
I like that.
We're trying to move beyond that overwhelming, just fuzzy cloud of intense feelings, whether
Yeah.
that's, crushing anxiety or that paralyzing kind of sadness or even explosive anger. We're looking at the actual predictable blueprint of how emotions work.
That's exactly it. The sources we've been reviewing are, well, they're rooted in something called therapeutic psychoeducation.
Okay, that sounds a little clinical.
It does, but for the layperson, it's really just a fancy term for the foundational concepts that get used in clinical settings. Our whole goal isn't just to summarize these things,
Yeah.
it's to translate them. We want to help you develop a more flexible and I think a more accurate understanding of your emotions and what their essential functions are.
So they stop feeling like this arbitrary chaos that just happens to you. Our mission today, then, is to break down that cloud into, well, predictable, manageable parts. We're talking about the triggers, the three components of the actual response, and this is the big one, the long-term consequences that keep us all trapped in these cycles of distress.
Hmm.
Okay, let's unpack this. But I think we have to start with this really crucial kind of counterintuitive nugget that really defines the entire approach we're taking today.
Yes. And this is the necessary foundation. I mean, if you came to this deep dive hoping for some guaranteed method to, eliminate anxiety or sadness forever,
Which is what everyone wants.
it's what everyone wants. But we need to adjust that expectation right now. The paradoxical sort of overarching goal of this entire framework is learning to better tolerate and adaptively respond to these intense emotional experiences.
Not get rid of them.
Not get rid of them. It's about getting away from those exhaustive and often, fruitless efforts to directly control or suppress or avoid them.
That feels like the hardest sell in the world, doesn't it? To tell someone who is really suffering, I mean, truly suffering from intense anxiety, that the goal is tolerance, not elimination.
It is.
So why is that the necessary first step? Why
It-
can't we just banish the bad feelings?
Because the emotional system it's not something external that we can just flip a switch and turn off. It's a fundamental part of our biology. It's wired for our survival.
Okay.
And trying to suppress an emotion, the analogy I always come back to is, it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Yeah, I've heard that.
It takes a tremendous amount of energy, and the second you release your grip, what happens?
It shoots right back up. Probably hit you in the face.
Exactly. It bursts back up with even more force.
Yeah.
Tolerance, or another word for it is acceptance, is the recognition that the emotion is present and it's temporary.
And that frees up energy.
It frees up all the energy you need to respond differently. It's really about convincing your rational brain that the difficulty of feeling bad right now is worth the eventual outcome down the line.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's talk about why these feelings even exist in the first place.
So we have to begin by addressing the very function of emotion. And emotions, whether they, register subjectively as pleasant, like joy or excitement, or unpleasant,
The ones we're talking about today.
the ones we're focused on, like fear, anxiety, sadness, anger, they are not arbitrary chaos. They are adaptive. They serve a necessary functional purpose,
They're a system.
a very sophisticated internal alarm system. Fundamentally, that's what they are.
They are messengers, not malfunctions.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. They alert us to important external or sometimes internal events or situations.
A threat, a loss.
For perceived injustice, yeah. And they powerfully motivate us to take action in response to whatever that signal is.
Here's where it gets, for me, really interesting because, as we just said, the vast majority of people who seek help, they're coming in specifically to eliminate the so-called negative feelings. We see sadness or anxiety as the enemy. It's something to be eradicated, almost like it's a virus that's invaded us. But the sources we're looking at stress that even these unpleasant emotions are absolutely vital at their core. I mean, if we didn't have fear, we wouldn't survive a genuine threat.
We'd be extinct. We must learn to observe these emotional experiences and consider their function first.
Before we judge them.
Before we judge them, before we label them. If we jump immediately to labeling the feeling as bad or irrational, and we move straight to suppression, we lose all the crucial information that the emotion is trying to give us.
So the first question is always, what is this trying to tell me?
Yes. This shift in perspective is everything. You have to ask, what message is this feeling trying to deliver? What's its job right now?
Okay, let's deepen this exploration using sadness. We can draw directly from the therapeutic material here. This really helps us understand its evolutionary function, which is often about connection and protection.
Right. Let's take the first use case vignette from the material. Imagine a young patient who remembers um, dropping their favorite, totally irreplaceable action figure down a storm drain as a child.
Oh, that's a visceral memory. I think everyone has one of those.
Everyone does. And the feeling is intense. It's this profound sadness and distress. The immediate reaction is just to run home crying.
And at that moment, the kid isn't thinking, my current situation requires social support to mitigate loss.
No, of course not. They are purely overwhelmed by that feeling of loss. But the question is, what was the adaptive function of that sadness? Why did that emotion show up?
It's a signal.
It's a signal.
Mm.
The sadness motivated connection and support. Crying is a universal human signal of distress and vulnerability.
It's a call for help.
It's a call for help. When the child arrived home crying, that emotional display immediately motivated the caregiver, in this case, the mother, to intervene. She was prompted to comfort the child, to provide emotional regulation,
And to try and fix it.
and to engage in problem solving. She attempted to retrieve the toy with a fishing rod. The emotion, sadness, motivated pro-social action. It drew in necessary resources, care, and connection to mitigate that perceived loss.
And if the child had just, been stoic, shrugged, and walked away.
They would have missed out on that vital comfort and that shared problem solving. They would have been alone with the loss.
The insight there is just profound. Sadness at its core isn't about being weak. It's about signaling the need for connection, which is a key survival mechanism for a social species like us.
And the exact same logic applies directly to anxiety, even though anxiety often feels like the most immediately debilitating one. It's so often perceived as just a pure obstacle.
Right, it just gets in the way.
Yeah.
So let's consider the use case of a patient experiencing anxiety before a job interview. That's vignette number 1.
Right.
Initially, that anxiety was entirely adaptive, right? Those first pangs of worry, the mild breathlessness, that increased heart rate, those were signals.
They were signals that said, attention, this event is important. You need to mobilize resources.
Right. Pay attention to this.
Exactly. That initial functional anxiety is what motivated the preparation. It's what prompted the patient to research the company, to think about the interview material, and to practice what they might say.
Or that little spark of worry, when it's managed, it actually fuels performance and excellence.
It serves a good functional purpose. It's your brain telling you to get ready.
But then
Yeah.
we hit that tipping point. And I think this is what so many listeners struggle with. When does that functional anxiety turn into paralyzing dread?
Well, the contrast comes when that functional anxiety escalates beyond the task at hand. So in that same vignette, the later stages of the anxiety became dysfunctional.
Okay,
It led to intense stress, rapid, overwhelming, doubting thoughts.
I'm going to fail. I'm not qualified.
Exactly. They're going to see right through me. And then the significant physical tension, like the tight shoulders, the neck pain,
And what was the resulting behavior that came from that state?
procrastination, and paralysis. The patient started cramming the night before, skipping sleep, or even just shutting down entirely.
Like avoiding their notes, maybe watching TV instead.
Yes, that is the moment the functional signal derails completely. The initial spark of anxiety said, prepare. But the later escalated anxiety led to avoidance behavior that actively undermined the preparation.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the problem wasn't the initial signal, that spark of anxiety that identified the importance of the situation.
No, that part was helpful.
The problem was the intensity, the duration, and the subsequent cascade of maladaptive responses that followed, which ultimately derailed the original functional intention of the feeling itself.
Exactly. And understanding this distinction is so crucial for increasing acceptance or buy-in for the work ahead. If you understand that anxiety is actually trying to help you, you are less likely to fight its initial presence.
You can work with it instead of against it.
You can't learn to respond adaptively if you don't acknowledge the initial function of the emotion itself. It moves the focus from getting rid of the feeling to shaping the response to the feeling.
That reframe shaping the response rather than destroying the feeling is the lock and key to everything else we're going to discuss today. Okay, so now we move to the mechanics, the nuts and bolts.
Yes.
Since intense emotions so often feel like this big, uncontrollable cloud, they feel irrational or senseless, like they just happen to you without any warning or reason. This is where our analytical solution comes in. We need to break that intense feeling into 3 main interconnected components.
And just the act of breaking it down immediately makes the feeling less overwhelming.
And more manageable because you can suddenly see the parts, not just the whole scary thing.
This is the three-component model of emotional experience. It's thoughts or cognitions, physical sensations, and behavioral urges. This deconstruction allows us to understand how an emotion occurs in response to something, and more importantly, it gives us insight into the causal interactions between these parts that keep the emotion going over the long term.
Okay, let's start with component one, thoughts or cognitions. This is the mental script that's running in the background.
The internal monologue.
It's how we talk to ourselves, our perception of the situation, the narrative we apply to the feeling. The way we think about the experience will absolutely color and define the way that experience is felt.
And these cognitions, they include predictions, like, I'm gonna fail. They include self-evaluations, I handled that terribly.
Interpretations, they probably hate me.
Or even rigid rules, like, I should always be productive. And the sources really emphasize that these thoughts are often automatic. They just pop into our consciousness without any deliberate effort.
And they're not necessarily facts.
They are not facts, they're just mental events.
So, to identify this component, the sources suggest these simple, almost detective-like questions. What specific thoughts do you notice when you feel depressed or anxious? So if someone is feeling depressed, the automatic thoughts are often self-critical and avoidant. Things like, I'm not doing a good enough job, or it's pointless to even try.
Or that insidious one, I should just stay in bed, which then, of course, fuels the feeling state even further.
Right. So the thought isn't just a symptom of the depression, it's an active ingredient that maintains it.
Absolutely. If you believe it's pointless to try, well, then your motivation drops to zero. Which brings us right to component two, physical sensations.
This is the body's contribution. Every emotional state, positive or negative, is associated with these powerful physical responses. This is the physiological expression of the emotion.
I mean, we are physical beings, and the body often reacts before the conscious brain has fully processed all the nuance of a situation.
Think about the difference between excitement and fear. What physical sensations make up the feeling of being excited?
Well, you've got an increased heart rate, maybe a surge of adrenaline, you feel energized, maybe that butterfly sensation in your stomach.
Okay, now compare that to panic.
Well, you've got a racing heart, shortness of breath, maybe mild feelings of unreality, lightheadedness, tingling in your hands or feet.
That's fascinating because a racing heart can be excitement or it could be the start of a panic attack.
Yes.
The physical symptom is the same, but the cognitive labeling, the thought, is radically different.
That is such a critical point. If you interpret that racing heart during exercise as, oh my God, I am having a heart attack, that physical sensation immediately triggers the emotion of fear.
Right.
But if you interpret the exact same sensation as, wow, I am pushing myself and getting fit, it triggers a sense of accomplishment or focus. This is why paying attention to physical sensations, something called interoception, is so vital. But we have to be so careful not to mislabel the signal.
And crucially, we often miss the more subtle physical sensations, like the ones associated with lower intensity emotions. Depression or sadness, for instance, isn't always a sharp pain. It's often a chronic physical fatigue.
Muscle tension, a general feeling of heaviness.
Or even a lack of appetite. That fatigue isn't just feeling tired, it's the physical component of the emotional response itself.
Which leads perfectly into component three, behaviors, behavioral urges. Since emotions are functional, right, they serve to motivate a behavioral change.
So these are the actions we engage in, or the powerful urges we have, as an almost automatic response to the feeling state.
The body just knows the best way to deal with the feeling, often before the conscious brain can catch up and analyze the situation.
We call them urges because the feeling is the motivation, and the urge is the nearly automatic call to action.
And examples are everywhere. Depression motivating you to stay in bed, to scroll endlessly on your phone, or to watch TV because the urge to confront the day just feels too overwhelming.
Or anxiety in a big social gathering, motivating the person to find the exit, or to immediately check their phone and look dizzy.
And these urges are almost always focused on reducing the immediate distress.
Okay, so now let's tie this all together, because this is where the cloud escalates into a full-blown storm. We need to talk about the reciprocal interaction, the vicious cycle starter.
Right.
These three components don't just exist side by side. They're constantly feeding each other, leading to that rapid escalation where emotions feel like they're going from 0 to 60.
This is the moment where the system becomes a self-sustaining feedback loop. A tiny thought can trigger a physical sensation, which the brain then interprets as a threat, which then generates more intense thoughts, which then further amps up the physical response.
And that rapid reciprocal interaction is what contributes to the emotion being maintained over the long term.
Yeah.
Let's use the detailed example of John, the patient who felt anxious after talking to his boss at work, and let's trace that loop in high definition. So John's experience didn't start with a physical dread. It started with a simple internal cognition.
Right. His initial thought was self-deprecating after he participated in a group meeting. He was thinking, I acted like an idiot.
My questions were stupid.
They must think I'm incompetent. Things like that.
And these thoughts, entirely internal, they immediately triggered physical sensations, a sudden spike in adrenaline while he replayed that interaction in his head.
His neck and shoulders tensed up. He felt a rise in his body temperature, maybe a little flush in his face.
Now here is the critical reciprocity loop. He noticed the racing heart and the tension,
Which his brain then interpreted as proof that he was, in fact, incompetent or under attack.
so the feeling validated the thought.
Exactly. These physical feelings provoked more intense negative thoughts like, I'm losing control, or everyone can see I'm nervous. And these escalated thoughts further increased the physical response, rapidly escalating his anxiety to a peak intensity.
So the key takeaway here is that his own attempt to internally process the situation, the negative thoughts, actually created a biological reaction, the physical sensation, that then validated the original negative thoughts. It trapped him in a loop before the conscious, rational part of his brain could even intervene.
That's the absolute definition of the vicious cycle. And at that peak intensity, the body defaults to the quickest solution for immediate distress reduction, which led to his behavior.
Which was what?
He elected to stop participating in the discussion. He withdrew entirely, retreated physically to his desk, and started avoiding eye contact.
And that withdrawal behavior worked perfectly in the short term, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. He felt a bit calmer. His heart rate probably decreased. The relief was immediate.
But the cycle wasn't finished.
No. Because he withdrew, later that day he had a consequent thought. I'm a loser for not being able to have a simple conversation. This is a critical cognition that was triggered by his own avoidance behavior. The anxiety created the withdrawal, and the withdrawal confirmed his belief that he was a loser, thereby ensuring that the anxiety would be even more likely to return the next day. This model shows you exactly where the system short circuits.
Okay, so understanding the three-component model is step one. But step two is putting that whole response, the thoughts, the feelings, the actions, into context.
Right, you need to see the whole chain of events.
This is where we use the detective framework, the acronym ARC. Antecedent, response, consequence. The goal here is to track your emotional experiences to understand when, where, and why they're happening.
And crucially, how those responses are being maintained over time, what keeps the cycle going.
Let's start with A, antecedents, or the trigger. This might sound basic, but for many people this is a revelation. Emotions never just come out of nowhere, even when it really, really feels that way.
I hear that all the time. I just felt anxious for no reason.
Right. But every single emotion is triggered by some event or situation, whether we notice it immediately or not. The trigger is the spark that starts that whole reciprocal engine we just described.
And the sources break down the triggers in a way that's incredibly useful for the listener. We can categorize the types of antecedents.
Most people only focus on the immediate or proximal triggers, the events happening right now.
Getting cut off in traffic, a partner giving you a dirty look, receiving a text message that cancels your plans, the obvious stuff.
But the most important element for long-term management is often the distant or distal triggers.
Yes. These are events that happen much earlier, sometimes days ago, that create a background condition of vulnerability.
So what are we talking about?
We're talking about poor sleep quality, being hungry, low blood sugar, having an unresolved argument with someone earlier that morning, or just carrying chronic stress from the entire previous week.
I think of the distal antecedent as the emotional equivalent of lowering your fuse.
That's a perfect analogy.
If I've had 3 nights of poor sleep, I skip breakfast, and I'm stressed about a looming deadline, my baseline irritability is already high. My fuse is short.
Exactly.
That distal stress doesn't cause me to yell, but it makes me far more likely to react explosively to the proximal trigger of, say, a colleague sending me a mildly curt email.
The lowered fuse analogy is perfect. The sources provide a wonderful example. A woman receives a text cancellation from a friend. That's the proximal A.
Okay.
If she was well-rested and calm, she might think, oh, well, busy schedule, no big deal. But if she had a long, tense argument with a loved one earlier that morning, that's the powerful distal A.
Right.
She may be far more likely to jump immediately to the self-critical conclusion that she is lame or that the friend canceled because of her perceived failures. It's a much stronger, more intense emotional reaction than the proximal event alone would have warranted.
So if you feel like you went from 0 to 60 for no reason, the key is almost always a distal antecedent. It's something lurking in the background that preloaded the emotional gun.
And we also have to account for internal antecedents. The trigger isn't always external traffic or text messages. It can be purely internal, physiological, or mental.
What do you mean by that?
Well, internal physical feelings include being jittery from too much coffee, that fatigue we discussed earlier, or even a sudden shift in body temperature.
And most powerfully, I would imagine, internal mental events, those intrusive, unwanted thoughts or images.
This is absolutely crucial for understanding cycles of shame or obsessive-compulsive cycles. If a patient experiences a truly intrusive, unwanted thought, maybe an aggressive image or a sexual image that conflicts with their values, that internal mental event immediately becomes the antecedent.
The thought itself is the trigger.
The thought itself is the A. That A then triggers an intense, painful emotional response of shame or guilt. The patient then responds by thinking, I'm a terrible person, that's the R cognition, notices physical tension, R sensation, and engages in behavioral rituals like checking or seeking reassurance, R behavior.
So the entire intense emotional response is internally generated by the antecedent of the unwanted thought itself. The outside world didn't need to do a single thing.
Not a thing. And understanding this framework helps people realize they're reacting to the thought, not necessarily to a real external danger.
And by identifying these patterns, you make emotions feel less unpredictable and far more manageable.
It allows you to prepare adaptive coping skills in advance. The source material provides a table, Table 6.1, which highlights these common antecedent patterns associated with different challenging emotional states.
Let's review those examples because I think they reveal a lot of common hidden triggers that people miss.
Yeah, they're great.
For panic disorder, common antecedents are often physical events that mimic anxiety. So this includes being in enclosed or crowded spaces, which restrict your perceived escape route.
But it also includes stimulants like caffeine or even strenuous exercise.
Wait, exercise? That's surprising. Why is exercise an antecedent for panic?
Because exercise naturally increases your heart rate and your shortness of breath.
Right.
If you are prone to panic and you are already hypervigilant about your internal sensations, component 2, those normal, healthy physical signs can be immediately mislabeled by your brain as, I'm losing control, or I'm having a cardiac event.
And that spirals into a full-blown attack.
Exactly. The antecedent is the physical activity itself, but it's misinterpreted by the anxious brain.
Okay, moving on. For generalized anxiety, triggers might be something like making a detailed schedule, being presented with a massive to-do list, or upcoming performance evaluations at work.
The common thread there is uncertainty or perceived performance demands.
Right. And for depression, antecedents often involve situations that highlight a feeling of deficit or loss. These include seeing others having fun on social media,
The comparison trap.
taking much longer to complete simple tasks, which feels like a personal failure, or just getting bad news.
And finally, for insomnia, the trigger can be incredibly direct, literally seeing the time on a clock in the middle of the night.
Which immediately triggers the thought, I should be sleeping, I'm failing at sleeping,
Yeah.
escalating anxiety.
Or, over time, simply the process of bedtime itself becomes the antecedent after prolonged difficulty sleeping. The bed becomes the trigger.
Wow. That depth of awareness of identifying the A is the necessary first step. So next in the ARC is our response.
Right. This is the immediate emotional response, and it's the easiest part because it's everything we just covered in Section 2.
It's the full three-component output.
The thoughts, the physical sensations, and the behaviors or behavioral urges. It is the action-packed reaction to the antecedent.
And finally, we have C, consequences. This is arguably the most crucial and I think most difficult part of the ARC to recognize.
It is, because it is what explains the maintenance of the problematic behavior. If we didn't get some kind of payoff from our responses, we just wouldn't keep doing them.
So the consequences, the C, of our emotional responses are not uniform. They're often dramatically different in the short term versus the long term.
A huge difference.
And this disconnect between what feels right now and what actually serves us later is the fundamental conflict that locks people into chronic emotional distress.
It's the gap between the life you want to live and the life you're currently leading in service of immediate emotional management.
Okay, let's talk about the short-term consequences first.
Short-term consequences are generally highly powerfully appealing because they are almost always examples of negative reinforcement.
That's a critical technical term that sounds confusing, but is actually pretty simple.
It is. It just means that engaging in the behavior leads to the immediate removal or reduction of something unpleasant.
Right.
In this case, uncomfortable emotions like anxiety, fear, or shame.
So let's break that jargon down conversationally. Negative reinforcement is not punishment,
No?
and it's not adding something good. It is the subtraction of something bad. It's that immediate relief you feel when you scratch an itch, the itch is gone.
Or when you hit the snooze button, the annoying alarm is gone.
That relief feels amazing.
It does. And when you apply that to emotional distress, the lure is irresistible. If you are socially anxious and you leave a crowded party early, you immediately reduce your social anxiety. That short-term reduction in distress is the negative reinforcement.
And that powerfully locks in the behavior of leaving parties early.
Right. Or if you have intense doubting thoughts and you indulge the urge to check the stove 20 times, you get that immediate relief from the anxiety caused by the doubt.
The brain is programmed for survival, and survival often means prioritizing immediate threat reduction.
Yes.
So the emotional part of the brain interprets that immediate relief as a survival mandate. It says, whatever you just did, do it again. It worked.
Because the result is so positive in the moment, you are strongly motivated to repeat that action, even if the action is destructive in the long term.
And this helps explain why it's so difficult to change these deep-seated habits.
The sources use that great analogy. We form behavioral habits based on short-term consequences far more easily than long-term consequences.
That's why it's easier to get into the habit of eating junk food, which is immediately gratifying.
Then it is to get into the habit of going to the gym, where the positive consequence, physical fitness, is delayed weeks or months later. Avoidance is the junk food of emotional regulation.
I love that. Avoidance is the junk food of emotional regulation. Okay, let's explore this learned behavior mechanism through the lens of survival instincts, as described in the sources.
Learned responses, generally speaking, are adaptive for survival. We can look at the rabbit example again.
Okay.
A small rabbit encounters a hungry fox hiding behind a certain tree. The rabbit, terrified, bolts in the opposite direction and escapes.
Smart rabbit.
Smart rabbit. The rabbit now avoids that tree forever. That avoidance behavior is entirely adaptive because the threat, the fox, was real. The rabbit learned a simple equation. Fear means avoidance, and avoidance means safety.
But then we get to the maladaptive shift. This is where the crucial problem arises for us as humans.
Because if these avoidance patterns become established, they are incredibly difficult to break, even when the threat is just perceived or generalized or is no longer present at all.
And the threat in human anxiety often shifts from the external event, the fox,
To the internal emotion itself, the feeling of fear or panic. The focus shifts entirely to avoiding the feeling of fear, rather than preventing a genuinely problematic event.
So if I have a panic attack on a bridge, my brain registers.
Yeah.
Bridge equals danger. Avoid. But the real problem isn't the bridge.
The real problem is the internal experience of the panic attack. But the brain generalizes the fear to the environment, and suddenly you're avoiding all bridges, even when you rationally know they are structurally safe.
Right.
And this is where the long-term consequences, the trap, becomes so clear. When you successfully avoid a situation out of fear, you inadvertently confirm your own belief that the situation or the emotion itself is dangerously intolerable.
You prove to your survival brain that the avoidance was necessary. You reinforce the fear.
And the truly devastating detriment here is that avoidance limits new learning.
What do you mean?
By fleeing the concert or avoiding the bridge, you never stick around long enough to learn two vital things. One, that intense or distressing emotions, like a panic attack, are fundamentally harmless, and they will eventually abate and fade away on their own, even without you escaping.
They peak and then they subside, like a wave.
Exactly. And two, you never learn that you have the ability to cope with the feared outcome, even if it happens. You remain stuck in the belief that the situation is dangerous and that you are helpless.
And so the fear and the resulting avoidance are likely to continue and spread, gradually shrinking your world.
Yes.
This results in a profound detriment to life goals, which is where the ARC model really hits home. Leaving parties early due to social anxiety leads to loneliness and isolation.
Which fundamentally conflicts with the value of connection, closeness, and being a good friend.
Or consider the person with excessive checking behavior. The checking provides immediate relief from the doubt, but in the long term.
In the long term, it reinforces the belief that doubting thoughts must be neutralized. This leads to time-consuming, intrusive behavior that can delay leaving the house by 30 minutes every single morning, stealing huge chunks of time and energy.
Which is completely inconsistent with the value of productivity and punctuality.
Exactly.
Let's use the stark reality of the disappointed sister, case vignette #4, to make this connection between short-term gain and long-term cost crystal clear for the listener.
This is a powerful one.
The patient asked, "I don't see what's so bad about leaving a situation if it makes me feel better."
And that question reveals the complete dominance of short-term negative reinforcement. In the short term, the consequence was undeniable. Leaving the sister's graduation party eliminated the escalating anxiety.
It was highly effective.
Incredibly effective at achieving the immediate goal of reducing emotional discomfort.
But the long-term cost was devastatingly high.
The patient felt they had disappointed their sister, potentially damaged the relationship, and missed out on a really important milestone, a cost that was entirely inconsistent with their deeply held values of being a supportive, loving sibling.
This is the crux of the dilemma, isn't it?
It is. The emotional response, which was intended by the avoidance behavior to protect them from momentary discomfort, actually detracted from pursuing a highly valued life goal. The solution, the avoidance, was the enemy of the life they actually wanted to live.
And this idea of the learned response finally helps explain why people engage in behaviors that seem irrational. They can say, "I know rationally the bridge isn't dangerous, and I know I value my sister, but I avoid it anyway."
Because the brain is stuck in a powerful, biologically reinforced loop. Breaking this vicious cycle requires a willingness to feel more distress in the short term.
You have to lean in.
You have to lean in because you must prioritize that long-term consequence and that valued life over the immediate emotional relief. That tolerance we talked about in the very beginning. That is the entry fee for freedom. #tag outro. So today, we have fundamentally shifted the way we view emotional distress. We've moved from seeing emotions as these chaotic, random events to seeing them as predictable, adaptive sequences.
Right.
We learned that every emotion, even the uncomfortable ones, starts with an initial functional purpose.
A messenger, not a malfunction.
Exactly.
And we broke down the mechanism into the three interconnected components of the response: the thoughts, physical sensations, or behaviors, showing how they feed into each other, often escalating really rapidly into a crisis.
Most importantly, we mapped out the ARC, the antecedent, response, and consequence, to understand that the short-term relief provided by avoidance behaviors is the definition of negative reinforcement.
Which is the very mechanism that locks us into long-term distress and prevents necessary new emotional learning.
It's the trap.
This deep dive is designed to significantly increase your awareness of those subtle, distal antecedents that trigger your responses, and the powerful yet deceptive, negatively reinforcing consequences of your reactions. You now have the forensic framework to start identifying your own emotional ARC, which is the necessary first step toward adaptive change.
So the next time you feel that emotional cloud descend, remember to just pause and use this framework. Ask yourself, what was the trigger, external or internal?
What did I feel, think, and want to do?
And what immediate relief did that action give me versus the actual long-term cost to my values, the C?
If avoidance is maintained purely because it provides that immediate relief, the true challenge and the ultimate path to flexibility is identifying what you value enough.
Yes.
What long-term goal, what relationship, or what life vision is important enough to motivate you to tolerate the short-term discomfort required to break the cycle.
So, here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. What are you willing to feel bad about now, in this moment, in service of the life you genuinely want to be living later?